Be here. Glad you're here. Glad to have a lovely session. We are here with the famous, totally real, not electronic painting behind me. It's been a while since we've been at this location. Usually we are in my bedroom, but today we are at the office with this beautiful, totally real, totally not electronic painting. I'm sitting here with some unnamed diet beverage. I'm about to open the can. And as many people have pointed out, when I open the can, it sounds just like someone is cocking a shotgun, doesn't it? Get ready. Doesn't it sound like, I don't know, the county sheriff, what's going on here? Doesn't it sound like that? I mean, it's like I swear, when you open a can of unnamed diet beverage and then start pouring it, it's like, Anyhow, hopefully at some point, we have different backgrounds on this program, right? We have, at first it started out, we always did it in front of the very famous bookshelf, right, with all of my books behind me. Then we started doing it, different places. Now we do it with the totally not electronic, totally 100% real. We swear it's totally real, even though it goes black every so often, and then I use a remote control to turn it back on, painting. And then after that, we've had different locations, the bedroom, etc. So hopefully we'll have the totally awesome, the amazing, famous bookshelf back soon. That would be great. But at the moment, we're no longer in the bedroom. We are here. Later today, I'm going to be streaming with Frank Analysis. Do people know the YouTube channel Frank, F-R-A-N-C, not K, Frank Analysis? I'm going to be streaming with him later this evening. It's going to be a good broadcast, so you can tune in for that. But right now, it's afternoon. I just went to the gym and exercised, got my work done for the day, ate some Chinese food very quickly, and now I'm here. I'm sitting in the conference room with some unnamed diet beverage in this cup, and I'm ready to talk with all of you. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Always good when you hit the notifications bell. That way you're informed when we're going to do one of these. And the way this show works is I do your super chats. I do super chats for you. And so keep your super chats rolling in. The more super chats you give, the longer I'm on here answering your super chat questions. Sometimes I'm quite tired when I do these late night lives and people just keep pouring in the super chats, but I keep answering them because, you give me a super chat, I give you an answer. That's the way it works. So glad you all are here. And I got some opening remarks. From there, we'll do the roll call. And then after we do the roll call, then I answer your super chat questions, and then we're done. And then at 8 o'clock, I stream with Frank Analysis. So, opening remarks, folks. Folks, I want to give an internet hug. An internet hug to anyone who is high school aged who is watching this right now. Can't hug you in person. I'm here and you're there. We're social distancing, obviously. But I want to give you an internet hug and give you a huge amount of affection. Folks, social distancing is difficult. It's very difficult. Not a fun thing to do. It's difficult for those of us who are adults. But if I were living at home, if I were stuck in my parents' house during this pandemic, I think I would have lost my mind by now. It must be amazingly difficult to be a teenager during this pandemic. A teenager or a child during this pandemic, it must be a complete and utter nightmare. And my heart just goes out to you. My heart just goes out to you. It is so difficult. Now, folks, I don't want to get into the whole thing. I am not a scientist. I'm not a scientist. And I know for a fact that COVID-19 is real. It's not a hoax. It's not a bioweapon. It's not a big conspiracy by the Illuminati. So, it's real. It's real. COVID is real. Health restrictions are necessary. And that's that. I mean, it's real, and it's created a bad situation. I will say, as someone who is not a biologist, as someone who's not a scientist, I don't understand why with the vaccines everywhere, we're not opening up faster. I don't understand it, but I guess I'm not a biologist, so I'm not here to tell you what we should be doing. I'm just saying, for me, it seems a little odd. And the worst thing about this pandemic is that, look, social media, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, there is a huge amount of pessimism that comes out of social media. Just a huge amount of hopelessness, a huge amount of negative energy, people fighting with each other, people accusing each other of bad things, people tearing other people down, people expressing hopelessness, people saying that there is no point. Just a huge amount of pessimism. And the social distancing and the pandemic has not only isolated so many of us, but it has made us captive audiences for that ugly pessimism. We all know that there are things that we would say on social media that we would never say in real life, right? In real life, we all tend to treat each other a lot more decently than we do on Twitter and on Facebook and on YouTube. Trust me, I'm sure that if I ever met many of the YouTube commenters who've said various things over the years in person, they would never be that rude to me in person. And the same goes for me. I mean, the same goes for all of us. And that creating that distance allows us to unleash that restrained negativity. We learn to be, polite. It's part of socialization, is we learn that it is our responsibility to be somewhat optimistic, to, you talk about, parents, they tell kids, have a good attitude, have a good attitude. Well, you don't just owe it to your friends and your family and your coworkers and your classmates and your teachers and your parents and your spouse and your brothers and sisters. You don't just owe it to them to have a quote-unquote good attitude. You owe it to yourself, right? You owe it to yourself to have a good attitude. Caleb is a Chad. Oh, well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Unbuttered Toast. You owe it to yourself, right? That you have to be able to psych yourself up. You have to be able to, to say to the world, there's all these negative things over there, but I am gonna teach myself to feel good. Amicale Cabral. Wow. I am gonna teach myself. I'm going to teach myself to feel good, to have a positive outlook on the world, to be optimistic in order to give myself the energy to accomplish things in life. You learn to overcome, right? You learn to grit your teeth. You learn to find the things that make you happy and focus on them in your mind. You learn to be optimistic. And on some level, you're doing it for other people. You do it because you want the people around you to think that you're radical optimism, to think that you are a happy person, to think that you're a good person, you're fun to be around. But at the end of the day, you might be doing it for other people, but you're really doing it for yourself. You are the beneficiary of it. If you're able to become a person with a positive attitude, if you're able to become somebody who does the right thing, who makes other people happy, it's good for you in the long term. It may, in the short term, benefit the people around you, but at the end of the day, it's you who benefits. Okay, all right, I'm writing it down. To be a rev party. All right, Sankara, Tomas Sankara. Very good. And it is something that really benefits you. And that's the beauty of being around other people, is that by being positive around other people, keeping a good attitude around other people, for the sake of other people, you are the one who benefits. You end up being a more positive person. You end up being happier when you learn to be happy and to keep a positive attitude for other people. And this is how it works. And that's why it's good to be around people. And social media takes that away. In social media, you're not really around other people. You're connected with other people in terms of information, but you're not relating to other people as people. Other people are just this electronic symbol. They're just this electronic representation of other people. And because of that, you're isolated, and your negativity comes out. And I may sound like a bit of a hypocrite as someone who's broadcasting to you over YouTube, for goodness sakes, but I'm telling you that poison comes out of your cell phone. Poison comes out of your laptop. That social media is not good for your soul. And what maintains people as people is their ability to relate to other people. Other human beings are almost like oxygen. They're almost like water. We need other people, and we need to be in the same room as other people. We need to connect with other people. We need that as people, and this pandemic has separated us from that. Plus, it's given us the only real connection we have to the world, is this toxic social media atmosphere, which brings out the worst in us, which doesn't give us the ability to connect in an empathetic way, and rather fills you up with this pessimism. Well, look, I want to make my audience better. I believe that it is my responsibility as a social media personality, as an influencer, as a journalist, as a writer, as a political analyst, to make my audience better. Now, that doesn't mean always telling my audience what they want to hear. Sometimes, in order to be better, you need to hear things that you don't want to hear. And, I'm not saying, and that doesn't come from a place of condescension. I'm not saying I'm necessarily better than you. Look, anybody could be watching this. There could be people here watching here with PhDs in physics and math, and I am awful at mathematics. I'm not a math kind of person. There could be people watching here who have PhDs in science. They're like, Caleb wants to make me better. Well, if I can help you improve in some area of your life, that's a good thing. But I'm not saying I'm better than you, right? It's not from a place of condescension. It's just from a place of responsibility. And I believe that that's what's been lost in art in our time, right? When Leonardo da Vinci painted the Sistine Chapel, he wasn't painting the Sistine Chapel because he wanted to get rich. He was doing it because he believed it would make people better. When Beethoven and Bach and Mozart composed their music, they didn't do it because they wanted to make lots of money. They did it because they believed it would make people better, right? When Shakespeare composed his plays, again, Shakespeare did not compose those plays because he wanted to be wealthy, right? He did it because he'd been, and these people had been selected by monarchs, right? In Italy, in Germany, in Britain, they'd been selected by monarchs, these great artists. And they composed their works because they had a responsibility, right? It was a feudal system. It was starting to become capitalism. It was the very beginnings of feudalism being broken apart. And you had Shakespeare, and you had Bach, and you had Beethoven, and you had Leonardo da Vinci, and they were selected by the monarch. And just like the monarch, he selected the royal blacksmith to make the swords for everybody, and just like he selected the royal what do you call them, tailor to weave clothes, he selected the composer, selected the painter, selected the playwright to make art for the kingdom. And there was a social responsibility that came with that art. Whereas now, much of the media that's put out there, much of the media that we see it's not the same thing. They're not being endowed with a responsibility by the sovereign, by the king, by the government. They're not being told, you are responsible for making the population better. Go and, compose your music or whatnot. Instead, they're working for a company, and that company is constantly looking at its profit margin. And it's constantly looking at its profit margin, saying, are we making money? Are we making money? Are we making money? And instead of feeling a responsibility towards society with the art, instead they're feeling a responsibility toward their profit margin. Many people have noticed that nowadays it seems like the term that is being used to refer to everything that people consume, movies, books, music, social media, the term that they're now using is they call it content. Content. And when you think of content, what do you think of, right? When you think of a painting, you think of a great piece of music, you don't think of content. Content sounds like, it sounds like something that you buy in bulk, right? It sounds like something that, you ever go to one of those stores where you can buy things in bulk, right? You can buy, a whole bunch of toilet paper, you can buy, a whole bunch of laundry detergent, and it's like, you got a truckload of content. Oh, Jesus, YouTube's not making money. Oh my goodness, Spotify is losing money. Quick, can someone call up? We need to get some more content. We need some more content. Can someone call up a content creator? Oh, great, we got a whole truckload of content coming into the factory. All right, thank goodness. Oh, there's 10 truckloads of content ready to dump into our factory. I mean, that's really what art is becoming. Music, poetry, performances, plays, right? Painting, music. I mean, it's all, social media commentary. It's all just becoming content, right? Content. Do we have more content? Well, content sounds so cheap. Content, right? And content doesn't seem to have a responsibility for the world, right? And that's the problem now, is it seems like we have replaced the beauty of human civilization, the beauty of art, with content, right? Did you consume some content? I think when you say, did you consume some content? I think about like a horse, eating the animal feed there. It's consuming the content. Did you go consume, young man, did you consume your content today? I want you to consume 3 hours of content. Got to consume that content, young man. That's basically where we're at. Regime. That's basically where we're at. And it's a problem, and it's resulting in a huge amount of pessimism. There are things you can do to combat pessimism that I've learned over the years, right? You can take certain phrases from the communist publications, right? I do this. That's why, for those of you who may be new or may not be familiar with this broadcast, the way we end these broadcasts, we end it the same way every single time. And how do we end it? I'm not ending it now. I'm just going to recite. We end it by saying, a new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Those words are deeply important to me. Those words have gotten me through many rough days and many hard times. I put those words to memory in about 2011, and they became my mantra. They became a deeply personal phrase that got me through so many hard times. And through memorizing that phrase, it means a lot to me, I learned that those words could give me some power. Those were words that if I were if it was having difficulty getting through the world, I could just start kind of reciting those words to myself, and I could gain some power, right? And I encourage people to do that. Find phrases, find revolutionary phrases, find revolutionary Marxist or anti-imperialist phrases, and make them your own. Use them, and use them. Memorize them. Make them part of you. And when the world seems overwhelming, when it seems like you're not able to do it, pull into those words. Recite those words to yourself. Pull into them and own them, right? Words can give you power. And, for thousands of years, people have done this, right? In ancient India, there were the chanting, the mantras, right? I think various religions have done this over the years. It's a technique that humans do to overcome difficulty, is they own phrases, they own words, and they recite them to themselves, right? And it helps if it's not simple, right? It helps if it's not like 4 words, if it's like 10 words, if it's a longer phrase, if it's a longer thing that requires you to do some psychological work to remember it, right? That gives you strength. That gives you strength. And so I encourage people, my goal with these broadcasts, I want you to be better than you were before you listened to this in some way or other. I want you to be stronger. And hear that word, stronger? I want you to be stronger, right? I want you to have more ability based on listening to these lives. I want you to go out into the world and have the ability to make a greater accomplishment, a greater achievement for humanity than you were before you listened to these lives, right? That's what I want to do, right? I'm not on here to pander, right? And that's, look, there are certain people who their channel, they just pander, right? They pander. They find the backwardness, they find the problems in their audience, they just pander to it, right? As much as I want you to be outraged about things that have been done to you that are not right, and I do want that. I want you to stand up against injustice in your life. I want you to realize if you've been mistreated. I don't want you to listen to this live and feel like a victim. I don't want you to listen to this live and feel like I've been screwed, the world is unfair to me, there is no hope. That's not what I want you to come out of here. I want you to come out of these lives feeling like the world is unjust. But we can overcome it, and we can find the strength within ourselves, and we can build a community to collectively be strong. I want these lives to glorify strength, not simply to wallow in weakness, not simply to remind people of their own weakness, not simply to make people feel like victims. That is my goal. I see Marxism-Leninism as an empowering ideology. I see Marxism-Leninism as an ideology that lifts people up and gives them a feeling of boldness. Governance of China. Gives them a feeling of boldness. That's what I want. That is what I want to do. I want you to feel empowered. I want you to feel like you can be part of something. And eventually, I want there to be an in real life community that emerges from these frequent discussions that we have on here. Look, folks, I'm done. I am absolutely done with any political movement that tears people down. I'm done with it. I'm done with it, right? Now, I'm all for people being humbled. I'm all for people admitting their mistakes that they've made or admitting privilege that they have, right? It's important to be real. But any movement that tears people down, I'm done with it. I'm done with it, right? I'm done with it. Look, folks, tearing people down, stripping people of their self-esteem, making people feel ashamed of who they are, I'm done with that. Not interested. Not interested. Folks, that doesn't help. That doesn't help. It doesn't help. And I'm not here to do that. And there are a lot of leftist groups. There are a lot of leftist movements. There are a lot of political tendencies that push that it's about making you feel bad. It's about making you feel inadequate, making you feel guilty, making you feel ashamed. I'm not doing that. I'm done with that. I have no interest in that, right? I feel like, yes, we should always be interrogating ourselves. Are we doing enough for the revolutionary movement, right? It's fair, right? Yes, we should be wondering how we can make ourselves better, but I'm done. I am totally done with any movement, any political current that is about tearing people down. I'm done with it. It's not helping. So many young people nowadays, they don't need to be torn down. They don't need to be torn down, right? They're having trouble finding a job. Their family is tearing them down emotionally, saying, "Oh, you must be a loser. When I was, back in the 1970s, when I was coming up, I had a house and a car and a TV, and I didn't even graduate from high school. You must be a loser." So many young people are being torn down and struggling to get through this world. And, they don't want to join a movement that's about tearing them down further. They don't want to join a movement that's about degrading them and making them feel more guilty, making them feel more ashamed of who they are. I want you to love who you are. I want you to love who you are. I want you to feel like you can make a big accomplishment. You can go out and be an important person in socialism. You can win people to socialism. You can change the world. You can be part of a group of people who empower each other. That's what I want you to feel on here. That's really what I want you to feel when you listen to me. That's what I want you to feel on here, right? If I am able to make you feel more powerful, make you feel more emboldened, make you feel more optimistic, help you get through the hardship of life, if I'm able to do that on these broadcasts, I have accomplished what I've set out to do. If a community of people, we have the Center for Political Innovation, the new website is coming along, it's going to be up pretty soon. Hopefully, we'll be having some national meetups as the pandemic restrictions are lifted. If I'm able to not only make you better as an activist, not only make you feel stronger and more confident, not only embolden you to be more optimistic and encourage you to go out and get things done, but if on top of that, I'm able to build some kind of community where we can do that for each other, a socialist educational community. If I can do that, then I have accomplished what I've set out to do. Look, one guy on YouTube is not going to overthrow capitalism and imperialism. I'll just be real about that. Me being on here, I might plant some ideas in somebody's head. I might inspire some people. I might educate people. But at the end of the day, I'm just a guy on YouTube. Now, I'm a guy who's also on international television. I've traveled around the world. I've written some books. But at the end of the day, the difference between me and you is not that huge, right? I mean, I am just doing my part, and I hope that you are as well. The way to keep myself optimistic is surround myself with serious but positive leftists who believe in humanity, bring hope to this world, not weak leftists who kill hope and give no alternative. Thank you, Nubium. Very good suggestion. That's where I'm at, right? And if I can do that, if I can build a community of people that are pulling themselves up together, studying Marxism, studying socialism, trying to envision a post-capitalist America, and then I've accomplished my goal, right? Then I am achieving what I've set out to achieve. And if a community can emerge based on the community we have here on the internet, then in real life community can emerge, then I've accomplished what I've set out to do. So I hope that you all are here. I know all of you are on board for the project. A strong code of discipline, right? Without tearing people down. Strong code of discipline. Without tearing people down. Alrighty, so there you go. So on that note, folks, I just wanted to ramble about that for a little bit. Maybe that opening wasn't exactly what people wanted to hear, or maybe people don't think that's very political, what I just said on there. But it's important that we keep perspective what we're doing here. Now, on that note, folks, today's Wall Street Journal. This is the Wall Street Journal, the right-wing newspaper of New York City. It's to the right of the New York Times, owned by Rupert Murdoch. Had this article on page A4, the fourth page of the Wall Street Journal. U.S. envies China infrastructure, but emulating it is not easy. Is no easy feat. All right. So, folks, I'm going to read you the first paragraph of this article. I'm just going to read it to you. Even China's staunchest critics express awe at its capacity to build bridges, railways, and other infrastructure, feats of engineering made possible by a command-style political system. Think about that. Let me read it one more time. Even China's staunchest critics, like even people who hate China, express awe at its capacity to build bridges, railways, and other infrastructure, feats of engineering made possible by a command-style political system. Folks, does it ever annoy you as much as it annoys me that the truth can be right in front of people's faces and people still deny it? The emperor has no clothes, right? You ever hear that story? Very famous story, right? It's not a true story. It's a fable, right? That, the emperor hires some tailors, and they weave him clothes, and they don't actually have clothes on. They're not actually clothes. And the emperor doesn't realize he's naked, and he's walking around naked. And everyone's afraid to tell the emperor, you don't really have clothes on, right? No one's brave enough to tell the emperor he has no clothes. Folks, that they every so often they just spell it out for you. They just spell it out for you in just plain English. Socialism works We have been told our whole life, communism has never worked anywhere. It's never accomplished anything. So countries try to have socialism, and they're all just become poorer because socialism just doesn't work. And now, what's the latest? Well, China, sure, their economy's working. China's economy is working, but that's only because they adopted free market capitalism, right? I mean, it's only because China has a market sector, and that market sector made them. When they were fully socialist or whatever, it just, communism just makes everybody poor, and the government can't do anything. That's why we need to privatize things, right? I mean, we got to have prisons for profit. The government can't run prisons, and we got to have schools for profit, charter schools. I mean, we can't have public schools, and we just got to privatize everything. We need private military contractors. While the government just can't do anything, right? And we got to privatize. Having the means of production forced by the state to work in the interests of society doesn't work, clearly. I mean, no country has it ever worked anywhere. And then they run this article. Even China's staunchest critics express awe at the capacity to build bridges, railways, and other infrastructure, feats of engineering made possible by a command-style political system. That China is building the fastest trains in the world. It has the world's largest hydroelectrical power plant. Right? It has built roads all over the country. It has raised 800 million people out of poverty. If you think that's a small number, 800 million people, that's a pretty big number. 800 million, pretty darn big number. Right? They have the biggest telecommunications manufacturer on Earth, which is a government-controlled mega corporation, Huawei Technologies. They make half the steel on Earth. We love you, Caleb. Well, thank you, Arthur. And China has had all these huge achievements. Now, tell me, what does this say here? Even China's staunchest critics express awe at the capacity to build bridges, railway, and other infrastructure, feats of engineering made possible by the magical free market that just magically makes it appear because that's what people want, and supply and demand and capitalism works. Is that what that article said? No, I don't think so, right? Even China's staunchest critics express awe at its capacity to build bridges, railways, and other infrastructure, feats of engineering made possible by free market capitalism and the government keeping its hands off and privatizing things and everyone working in their own interest, virtue of selfishness, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Is that what the article said? No, it doesn't, right? So did this magical market sector that's supposed to be responsible for all of China's achievements, is that what builds the fastest trains in the world? No. This magical market sector that's supposed to be responsible for all of China's achievements. Now, is that what made Huawei Technologies a huge mega corporation, the biggest telecommunications manufacturer in the world? Is it? No, I don't think so. Geez, now tell me, was it the magical market sector that made China have the biggest power plant on Earth, the Three Gorges Dam, the world's largest hydroelectrical power plant? It was just magically built by the free market. Is that who built it? No, I don't think so. Meanwhile, geez, free markets are what makes China so great. Why is it that Haiti, a deeply impoverished country like Haiti, where they have total free market, unregulated capitalism, neoliberalism, why are they not, speeding ahead? And why are there countries all over Africa, like Nigeria, even though they're the top oil exporting country in Africa, they're still impoverished and have nowhere near, they have whole sections of the country that don't have electricity and running water. Give me a break. This lie that you can't have a state-run economy, you can't have the means of production organized to serve public good and not profits, and have growth, is so obviously false. It is so obviously false. It is such an obvious lie. Such an obvious lie. But it just gets repeated. People just keep saying it. Why? Well, because, right? They say socialism never accomplished anything. How did Russia become a superpower? Right? What was Russia in 1917? And what was Russia by 1936? What was it? What happened? They adopted socialism, so clearly they just became poorer, right? No, I think they became fully industrialized. Compare Russia in 1917 to Russia in 1936, right? Before 1917, barely any electricity. Afterwards, fully electrified. Mass illiteracy, illiteracy wiped out. Mass unemployment, unemployment wiped out. Much of the population living in huts without running water and electricity. Almost all of the population living in modern apartheid. I mean, you cannot say objectively that Stalin's 5-year plans made Russia poorer. You cannot say objectively that socialism did not vastly improve living conditions in the Soviet Union. The socialist central planning made the Soviet Union into a global superpower. While the rest of the world was having a Great Depression, the Soviet Union zoomed ahead. It built the world's biggest steel industry. They were producing more tractors than any other country in the world. They electrified the entire country. They wiped out illiteracy. In the arts, their achievements were massive. They had Sergei Eisenstein, the father of the montage. They had ballet performers, some of the best ballet in the world. They had a population that was healthy and won gold medals in the Olympics for their achievements. How on earth does anybody say that socialism in the Soviet Union didn't work? I mean, how do they say this? Cuba, right? Look at Cuba in 1959. Look at Cuba today. Is there anybody that would say Cuba was better off in 1959 than it is today, right? Before 1959, mass impoverishment, mass homelessness. Now, full universal housing, universal electricity, wiped out illiteracy. I mean, it's like the achievements of socialist governments are very clearly demonstrated. They industrialize countries, they build power plants, they build water systems, they build railroads, they eliminate illiteracy with mass literacy campaigns, sending people to the countryside to get rid of adult illiteracy, right? They have universal employment. They have, they create education systems so every child can go to, I mean, what the socialist governments around the world have accomplished in terms of industrialization, raising people out of poverty, building up countries is massive. And if you look at what China once was, and you look at what China is today, I mean, it's so clear that socialism works. And when people give this argument, right, oh, well, it's only because of China's market reforms they've succeeded, that's completely ridiculous. First of all, China is not a free market country. Look, I mean, they have huge state-controlled banks, right? They have huge state-controlled industries. They have a 5-year economic plan made by the government about what the economy is going to do, right? On top of that, the private corporations do not function according to their own free will, right? The private corporations are routinely dictated to and told what to do by the government, right? They may be a private for-profit corporation, but every so often they get called up by the government and told what to do, and if they don't do it, they have a problem. And on top of that, the private sector itself is so carefully manipulated by state subsidies and state initiatives that it's not the rule of profits. Capitalism is the system of the anarchy of production. Right? Frederick Engels, he said, under capitalism, the means of production only function as preliminary transformation into capital. Right? Mao Zedong said profits are in command. Karl Marx used the phrase the anarchy of production. That's capitalism. China is clearly not capitalism. Capitalism is Nigeria. Capitalism is Haiti. Capitalism is the United States of America, right? Capitalism is the rule of profits. It's an economy centered around making profits for a group of private owners. Socialism is when the banks, factories, and industries, the major centers of economic power, are forced to work in the interests of society overall. It's production upon a predetermined plan. And the argument that, yes, I mean, China did have to adjust, right? Coming out of the Cultural Revolution, it was necessary to adopt a market sector. But arguing that the market sector improving things in China adjusting its socialist system to include a market sector, proves that capitalism is the best system. That would be like arguing that, hey, it's a little cold in your bedroom, right? You have a bedroom and it's cold, so you turn the heat on, made it a little warmer. And it made things better, right? So therefore, you should light your bedroom on fire, because clearly it shows that more heat is always the solution. China did not adopt capitalism. It adjusted its socialist system and did so very effectively. How in the world does that prove that they should abandon socialism? It does not make the argument at all. I mean, it's not logical at all. It is not logical at all, right? You know, it's a little cold in my bedroom, so that, and I turned the heat on and it made it better. So therefore, we should all live on the sun, right? Because, I mean, clearly more heat is always the answer. I mean, this is the argument they're making. To call China free market, right? The same people that are always telling you that Obamacare is communism, even though it's not even government health care, right? Even though there's like slight regulation. Obamacare is communism. Oh, we can't have Obamacare. That's communism. The income tax is communism, even though almost every country in the world has an income tax. Oh, it's communism. You know, and somehow they look at China, government-controlled industries, 5-year plans, government-controlled banks, ruling Marxist-Leninist party. Even the private sector can't do what it's supposed to do. 90 million member Communist Party is in charge, but somehow it must be capitalism. It must be capitalism because why? Because that's the only thing that can make sense and make your ideology work, right? You have to believe that because that's the party line. The emperor has no clothes, right? They just have to keep repeating this thing that everyone knows to be false. No one is brave enough to come up here and say what's obviously true. And when I say nobody, I include Jacobin, right? The Jacobin crowd. I am furious. The Cato Institute is one of the main think tanks. The Cato Institute, the Reason Foundation, they're the ones always pushing this libertarian agenda that we can't possibly have the state, regulate the economy. Oh no, got to privatize schools, got to privatize prisons, we got to lower taxes on the rich. The government, got to get the government off our backs. Free markets are the answer. Communism never accomplished anything and only killed. The same people always pushing that. And so Jacobin is perfect for these people because I've watched it with my own eyes. I've watched it with my own eyes many times. I've watched it. They'll have a debate with one of these Jacobinites. One of these. Well, there you go. I'm tempted to say something here, but I'm not going to. Tempted to give them a nasty nickname, but I'm above that. But anyway, one of these Jacobins, that they'll debate them, and they'll just say all the standard libertarian lies, right? All the standard communism never accomplished anything except like turning Russia and China into superpowers and lifting millions of people out of poverty. But other than that, it never accomplished anything, right? Communism never invents anything. Well, space travel and, AK-47. Yeah. But other than that, communism, they just get up there. All right. Foster's Critique of Browder. All right. They get up there. And they just repeat all the standard anti-communist cliches. And what is the response of the Jacobin crowd? What do? They say, oh, that's true. Yeah, but we're against state socialism also. Oh, okay. They're against state socialism. That's what they say. They all, no, we're against state socialism. That's what they say. They're against state socialism. So everything that the libertarians say is true, and they're just against state socialism. And that they think socialism is just voluntary worker cooperatives, and that's what they're for, and we can't have state socialism. So that's what they say. So then, it gets back to the libertarians. What do the libertarians always respond with? I've seen this debate happen over and over and over again. Over and over again, I've watched the same debate. So it's not like the Jacobins don't know what the libertarians are going to say. The libertarians say, if you want to form a worker cooperative business, go right ahead. That doesn't violate the principles of libertarianism. We just want to completely deregulate the economy and let the market, destroy people's lives. But if in the process of, having the market destroy people's lives and getting rid of food stamps and starving people on the street and destroying working class communities and tearing down the lives of working families, if in the process of opening the United States up to the international bankers so they can sink their fangs into it, if in the process of driving living standards down, if while we're destroying the lives of millions of working people, if while we're setting up a system of prisons for profits, if while we're privatizing the military and making war profiteering far more insane than it's ever been, if in the process of carrying out our maniacal agenda to drive human beings apart and leave no remaining nexus but callous cash payment, right? If in the process of doing that, you want to get together with your friends and form a voluntary worker cooperative, you can go right ahead. We won't stop you. By all means, as long as you don't get in the way of our agenda of neoliberalism, As long as you don't, try to have the state protect people, as long as you don't try to set up a government of action to fight for working families, as long as you don't do that, as long as you're only, as long as you don't have the government involved, we have no problem with you setting up a voluntary worker cooperative. Go right ahead, there you go. Yeah, set up a voluntary worker cooperative. And it's true. They're being honest. I've seen Ben Shapiro say this. I've seen libertarian after libertarian. Libertarians have no objection to fake socialism. None, right? Look, if you think that having the state run the economy is evil, if you think that having the state, control the means of production is evil, if all you want to do is set up a bunch of voluntary, worker-owned businesses, the libertarians have no problem with that, because that doesn't stop their maniacal evil agenda in any way. Doesn't stop it in any way. And when it gets down to it, in some ways a worker cooperative might be more efficient. In some ways it might not be, right? Not everyone is entrepreneurial, you have to remember. Some people don't want to be their own boss, right? Some people just want to go to work, get their paycheck, and leave. They don't, some people, however, do want to, share in the direction of their company, and some don't. And there might be a worker co-op that's better than capitalism, because or better than a private company, because the people have more invested in it. There might be examples where, a privately owned, single owner company that has wage workers is more efficient. It's not really a threat to their system in any way. It's not a threat to their system in any way. And they know that. And that's why these Jacobins have been set up. That's why these worker cooperative hacks have been set up, right? That's why they're there. They're there to deal with the fact that so many people are interested in socialism right now. So many people are interested in communism and socialism because capitalism is crashing and failing. They're there as a barrier. They're there to say, oh, okay, well, we've got this new reinterpretation of communism and socialism that won't challenge neoliberalism. Look, folks, it's all connected to neoliberalism. What do you think their beef is with Russia? Do you think their beef with Russia is that they are just so concerned about LGBT people and they heard that somebody somewhere in Russia was homophobic? No. What is their beef with Iran? Do you think they just don't like Shia Islam? Do you think that's what their beef is with Iran? What do you think their beef is with Venezuela? What do you think their beef is with Cuba? What do you think their beef is with China? Why do they not like these countries? Because these countries have stood up to them. These countries have broken free, and they have kicked out the system of free market insanity. They have reorganized the economy to be centrally planned. They have raised their people up from poverty. Instead of being a captive market of deeply impoverished people, they've transformed their countries into being strong competitors with their own industries, exporting their own oil and their own steel on the international markets. They don't like that. And what after the fall of the Soviet Union in the 1990s, what did they have in Russia? Neoliberalism. Neoliberalism. What did they have in Venezuela before the rise of Hugo Chavez? Neoliberalism. What did they have in Bolivia before the rise of Evo Morales? Neoliberalism. And in fact, one of the big things that led to the rise of Evo Morales in Bolivia was the privatization of water. Did you ever hear about that? The privatization of water? And thank you, Piano Man. The privatization of water. The international corporations, the big multinational corporations in Bolivia, bought the water of Bolivia, the rainwater, the water of Bolivia. And it was a crime to collect water on your rooftop because you were stealing from Nestle and Coca-Cola and American companies that had bought the water of Bolivia. Right? Before Evo Morales came in, it was a libertarian paradise. Libertarian paradise, right? Even the water is privatized. Nothing is collectively owned. Not the air, not the water, not the land. It's all privately owned. The free market, right? Should have been a free market paradise, right? Venezuela in the 1990s was gutting the state sector. The IMF and the World Bank, after the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia was they're selling off all the assets, privatizing everything. It was a nightmare. And the same thing they've been doing to this country. Private schools for profit, eliminating the union jobs where teachers get decent wages, schools for profit, right? Prisons for profit, right? Getting rid of good-paying industrial jobs, shipping them to other countries, right? Driving wages down, right? You got municipalities that can't afford to maintain paved roads. This is libertarianism. Libertarianism and synthetic leftism are two sides of the same coin. They're the same agenda, driving people further apart from each other, isolating people socially, making people less connected to each other, putting individualism above all else, breaking down any sense of collective duty, any sense of connection. The synthetic left and the libertarians are two sides of the same coin. They both reject the notion that the government should serve the people. They both reject the notion that people have an obligation to each other. They both reject the notion that human beings are collective creatures. And they both have utter contempt for humanity. They both see humanity as a vulgar mob tearing down the mighty individual. Folks, it is petty bourgeois ideology. That is what libertarianism and synthetic leftism are. Petty bourgeois ideology. They see the masses of people as the enemy. And they see the only purpose to protect the great ones from the vulgar mob of others. And this is an ideology, whether it comes in the synthetic left form or it comes in the libertarian form. This is an ideology that destroys civilizations. If you want to destroy a civilization, pump this stuff in there, all right? Civilizations are strong when people feel as if they have a common purpose. Civilizations are strong when people are working together. I'm just telling you obvious truth. When people are feeling connected to each other, when people are feeling like they are part of a community, that is when the great achievements and the beauty can be created. And right now, we're seeing a naked display of libertarian, petty bourgeois ideology from the left and from the right. And what we need more than ever is to build a community, to hold ourselves together, to pull ourselves up, to remain optimistic, to remain constructive. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Say it again. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Say it one more time. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Popular power, community power, the relentlessness of the human spirit. We can defeat the scourge of neoliberalism, libertarianism, synthetic leftism, the scourge of isolation, of poverty, of war, of hopelessness. We can do it. Humans depend on each other to be happy. Humans depend on each other to keep optimistic in the world. And humans depend on each other to keep civilization rolling ahead. And that is my opening remarks for tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. And now I will call you out as I see you, names and locations, as I drink unnamed diet beverage. Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. Who's with us? I'll call you out as I see you. Roll call time, names and locations. Who's with us? California, Montreal, Kendall and San Diego, Cleveland Pirate Alex, amazing stuff, very good. Montreal, Australia, Calgary, Alberta, Orlando, Cincinnati, Ohio, Jenny Lind, good friend of the program, Working Class Unity, Bendigo, Australia, Pennsyltucky, is that what they call Pennsylvania now? Springfield, Missouri, Denver, Colorado, Toronto, Nate in Chicago, Hawaii, Baltimore, Clydebank, New Jersey, South London, Big Al in Chichester, New York, Beltway region, Max the Sax, good friend of the show. All right, and you're now a moderator, Max the Sax. Just took care of that. All right, Four Oaks, North Carolina, Marty in Illinois, Adam in Australia, Wisconsin, Brazil, Tim Stacy in Kentucky, Adelaide, Australia, NYC, Io Hillary, Jack Dundee, Char Darling, good friend of the program, Warrington, UK, Man Cave in Cambridge, United Kingdom, Arturo in Anchorage, Alaska, Maryland, Parasocialite in Maryland, shout out to Maryland, Australia, Baltimore, Pasadena, formerly southwestern Indiana, Solidarity from Clinton, UK, Virginia, Michael in Ithaca, New York, very, very good, Sweden, Balthazar in Oakland, Canada, Nassau County, New York, Northern Italy, very good. Philly and San Diego. John in Houston, very good. Kieran in San Diego, Space Coast, Florida. JT24 in Mississippi. Tara Hoot, great to see you again. Caleb, says Charles Rogers, great to see you again too. Joey from McKees Rocks, very good. Belize. Hey, Joe the Red, good friend of the show. CEO of Antifa. Okay, Norway. Jeff from Detroit, Brazil, Jack Dundee, Mohsen from Iran, Knoxville, Tennessee, Detroit, Joanne in the Netherlands. Welcome, Joanne. Beltway, Virginian, Rosso from Texas, Seattle here, Roy from Soledad, California. All beverages shall remain forever unnamed, says David Fox. Absolutely, David, absolutely. Atlanta, Georgia, Johnston County, North Carolina, Venezuela, Aberdeen, Washington, Oakland, Portugal, Kalamazoo, Michigan, Wisconsin, Sydney, Australia, Norway. It's either my way or Norway. Just kidding. All right, Florida, tuning in from Dallas, Texas, Massachusetts, Mexico, Chicago, Portugal, Northern Michigan. Love the show, says A Better America. Very good. Mountains of Vermont, Sussex, UK, Newton Grove, North Carolina, Peter from Poland. Dad jokes. Wow. Wow, folks. Glad to engage with all of you here on our program. All right, folks. Oklahoma, your student, learning a lot, says Mohammed Shah. Phoenix, Arthur Porter. Very good. I got at least 3 Michigan in here. Pretty cool. Very, very good. So now I start answering your super chat questions. Amilcar Cabral was a very important anti-colonial revolutionary. His writings are called Unity and Struggle, and he was an anti-imperialist and a Marxist-Leninist organizer. He wrote about the mass line and how you mobilize people in a colonized country. Very important writer, Amilcar Cabral. I encourage people to check out his writings. Very important anti-imperialist writer and revolutionary. Role of growth in socialism. Is there already enough to go around? Okay, all right. Growth in socialism. Very good super chat question. Enough already. All right. I think you missed my chat on Angola. So you're asking about Angola? All right, I'm writing down Angola. All righty. Okay, radical optimism. Yes, being optimistic in this world is radical. It is very radical to be optimistic in our times, right? Pessimism is pouring in from your cell phone. It's pouring in from your computer. It's pouring in from your television. Pessimism is everywhere. And what is this pessimism? Well, this pessimism is the ruling class. And this pessimism is the ruling class saying that, oh boy, history must end because we're in charge. History of the Three Internationals, very good book. Glad you're reading it. But this is the ruling class saying, we're in charge. We're on the top of the world. And because we're in charge, history ends here. Imagine a game of King of the Mountain. Did you ever play King of the Mountain when you're a kid? There's like a little hill, and you try to get to the top, and imagine, it's a game, King of the Mountain, and they're already at the top of the mountain, and they have announced game over. We're at the top. But China is rising, and Russia is rising, and Cuba is rising, and Venezuela is rising, and Iran is rising. But they're already at the top of the mountain. So they've announced, there is no future. There is no future for humanity. We must stop here. Bad for Mother Nature. Growth is bad. There's too many people in the world. We should all be hopeless. There is no future. Be miserable. I mean, this is what they're doing. They're declaring game over on human civilization. And because of that, they announced that the game must be over. Well, we're here to say no. There is no limit to the achievements of humanity. Human beings are always striving to advance. The very nature of humanity is our ability to carry out innovations, to develop tools and technology, to keep advancing in spite of hardship, interacting with our environment differently. And no, this isn't the end of the human race. It's the end of capitalism. There is no limit to growth. There's only a limit to profits. There is no limit to growth. There's only a limit to capitalism. And capitalism has reached its limit. The irrationality of the profit system has reached its limit. Absolutely. What can we do to stop the hate crimes toward Asians, do you think? Okay, well, writing that down. Very important question. Stop hate crimes toward Asians. And you said media blaming black people. Yeah, I am a radical optimist. To be a communist in these times, you must be an optimist. All right. Someone asked, when did the Communist Party USA stop being a revolutionary party? Well, I mean, I know a lot of people that are in the Communist Party USA that seem like revolutionary people. The Communist Party USA has been through a number of shifts and changes. Okay, and this is something that a lot of people, Trotskyites, right? Right? There's a lot of Trotskyite music on the internet. You can listen to these silly songs Trotskyites made to make fun of the Communist Party, right? What is it? There's a number of them, but one of them's called "Our Line's Been Changed." Our line's gonna change again, or our line's been changed again, right? United fronts are what we love. Our line's been changed again. From below and from above, our line's been changed again. I know it, Browder. I know it, Browder. I know it, Browder. Our line's been changed again. And so much Trotskyite mockery of the Communist Party is based on the fact that their political line shifted, right? In the early 1930s, they said that the Social Democrats were social fascists, and they argued their main focus was on exposing the Social Democrats. Then, in the late 1930s, they adopted the Popular Front position. Then, when World War II broke out, they were very, big supporters of Roosevelt and the Democratic Party and fighting World War II. Then, after World War II, they said U.S. imperialism was the main danger to humanity, and they voted for Henry Wallace and the Progressive Party. And yes, the position of the Communist Party changed a lot. That's good. That meant they were trying to win, right? They were constantly adjusting their tactics because they were actually trying to win. See, in Marxism, we understand the basic concept of dialectics is that A does not equal A. That first A can never be identical to the second A. Everything in the universe is constantly in a state of change. And so a communist party should constantly be adjusting its tactics to be more effective. Lenin, in his book, What is to be Done, he says, if the situation changes in 24 hours, the tactics must also change in 24 hours. So the fact that the Communist Party was changing its position was a good thing, not a bad thing. Trotskyites think communism is a religion, and they think that there is the one true holy line of Lenin, the Bolshevik-Leninist position, and under all circumstances, you should be doing exactly the same thing. That's basically the argument, that what the Bolsheviks did in July of 1917 is what all communists should do all the time, and it magically leads to revolution. And that is not true. Learned from the failures of the French Commune and German Revolution. All right, French Commune, German Revolution. All right. That's just not how the world works. The world is constantly changing. They used to joke that the Z in William Z. Foster's name stood for zigzag, right? It was William Zigzag Foster. Well, if that's the case, that shows that he was serious. Look, I was in a communist group for a long time, and that communist group had not had a new idea in 40 years. They had not changed their tactics in 40 years, right? And many people who are in these irrelevant little groups, they're doing the exact same thing. They're on a hamster wheel, and they're going like that, they're on the hamster wheel, and they're not changing anything. So the mockery of the Communist Party for changing their position is it is idiotic Trotskyite nonsense. It's good that the Communist Party was changing its position because they were trying to get shit done. They were trying to actually win. And I'm not in the Communist Party. I know a lot of good people who are. There are some people that I've met in the Communist Party that seem pretty reformist and seem, not revolutionary. But there's a lot of people I know who are in the Communist Party that seem the opposite. They seem very revolutionary. So I am not interested in competing. I am not interested in, my dad is bigger than your dad and could beat up your dad. I'm not interested in that, right? I'm done with that. I'm over it, right? I don't care which one of the little irrelevant communist parties in the United States is better than the other. I'm not playing that game, right? I know a lot of people in many groups. I could sit here and name all the groups I know people in, and good for you. I was in a group for a long time. Before that I was around another group, and I know a lot of people that are in groups. I'm building the Center for Political Innovation to get past this and get to the masses. That's what I want to do. I want to build a socialist educational project and community to get to the masses. That's what I want to do. I want to get to the masses. And I want to build a mass socialist education organization that goes around the country bringing socialism to people who've never heard of it and bringing a type of socialism that could actually win the broad masses of people over. A constructive, optimistic, patriotic socialism. Out of the movement and to the masses is my slogan. So, look, there are, if you want to know, not my opinion, but you want to know what people generally say. Trotskyites say that the Communist Party USA stopped being revolutionary in 1928. That's generally their position. It became Stalinized, right? You get Maoists who generally say that the 1957 convention of the Communist Party is when it stopped being revolutionary, because at the 1957 convention, the Communist Party, it no longer advocated the right to armed struggle, and basically said that armed struggle, they would never allow any, they would not support anyone engaging in armed struggle, that they called universally for a peaceful transition to socialism, even in countries where that was not possible, like South Africa, and that they rejected black nationalism. At the 1957 convention, the Communist Party declared that they were no longer supporters of black nationalism. But now, I know a lot of black nationalists who are in the Communist Party, right? On the last CPI broadcast, there was an activist from Washington, D.C., who is a black nationalist and a member of the Communist Party. And there are a number of black nationalists in the Communist Party at this time that I know of. So, the Maoist critique that the Communist Party was only for a peaceful transition and didn't support black nationalism, that seems to have changed. So, I don't know what to tell you. I'm not here to tell you. What I can tell you is the Communist Party is very small, and it's not in the process. There aren't people in Iowa or Kansas who are getting a knock on their door, and it turns out when they get to the door, it's not the Jehovah's Witnesses, it's not the Mormons, it's actually the Communist Party. It's not happening, and that's okay. They want to do other things, and I respect their right to do other things. I'm building CPI so that one day there's a family in Idaho, and they never knew anyone who was a communist. Someone never in a million years did they ever consider being a communist. And one day, someone knocks on their door, and they're wearing a suit and a nice shirt, and they say, "Hello, I am from the Center for Political Innovation, and I want to talk to you about communism." And they say, "Communism? Why would anyone be a communist? That's outrageous." And they say to them, "Well, actually, communism is what would make our country better." And they sit there and they have a conversation about communism that isn't about you're an awful person for your white privilege. It isn't about how, we need to burn the American flag, but actually about how we need a government of action to fight for working families. that's what we need. We need a mass socialist educational project to get out of the movement and get to the masses. That's what I'm doing. You can do whatever you want. Many different groups are doing all kinds of different things. That's what I want to do. As Mao Zedong said, you fight your way, I fight mine. You fight your way, I fight mine. So that's my position, and there you go. Trotskyism is petty bourgeois trend, not Marxism. I agree, David. I absolutely agree. But we can talk about that too. I'll write it down. What do we think about Sakai dorks who think America is bad? All right, we'll talk about that. So Trotskyism and Sakai. All righty, there we go. Okay. All right, Thomas Sankara. He was the socialist revolutionary leader of Burkina Faso. And he has some very good writings. And he, led a socialist uprising and was the socialist leader of Burkina Faso for many years. Very friendly to Cuba, very much anti-imperialist. I believe he quoted Trotsky at some points. I could be wrong about that. But he was a great revolutionary leader, anti-imperialist, military leader. And there are still a lot of people in Burkina Faso that admire Thomas Sankara, from what I understand. He still has a big following in the country. All right, now someone asked about, what about using the word regime? Regime. Regime can be derogatory. I mean, it's not really. If you exercise, did you know this? Right? If you exercise regularly, all right, your schedule to exercise is called your fitness regime, right? Regime is not necessarily a derogatory word, right? It just means rule or agenda or a plan, right? If you exercise 5 times a week, you are keeping a fitness regime, right, in your life. The word regime is not necessarily derogatory, but it's one of those words that, because of the way it is used, it has become derogatory, right? If you don't like a government, it's a regime. If you do like a government, it's a state, it's a country, right? But if you don't like it, it's a regime. It's weird how these things work. But it sounds derogatory, even though it's technically not a derogatory term if you look up the definition. All right, Governance of China by Xi Jinping. Very good. When that book came out, when Volume 1 came out, I was very blown away. The first thing that struck me about Volume 1 of the Governance of China by Xi Jinping is that it was not even in the text. In the footnotes, they had a definition of Marxism-Leninism. That was amazing to me. In the footnotes, it had basically explained what Marxism-Leninism was in a footnote. That was huge, right? And the theory of imperialism from Lenin. Yeah, and it explained Marx's theory, class struggle, dictatorship of the proletariat, Lenin's theory, imperialism, national liberation, vanguard party. In the footnotes, it had what is Marxism-Leninism? I thought that was the coolest thing. And that's a big change, because China didn't talk that way in a lot of their publications for a long time. In the 90s, they wouldn't have put out a book like that. So the fact that there was a book that, the first thing that struck me is, in the footnotes, it's explaining what is Marxism-Leninism. That was huge. The essay about Mao Zedong thought must be central in all things. Amazing. Explaining what socialism with Chinese characteristics is, why it's not capitalism. Amazing stuff. The Belt and Road Initiative, right? Volume 1, Volume 2. I haven't gotten my hands on Volume 3 yet, but Volume 1 and 2, I read them and I was deeply impressed. Deeply impressed. China is not spreading global communism around the world, okay? China is not trying to foment a global communist revolution. They do not export their system, and they make that clear. So if you're looking for President Xi Jinping's governance of China, if you're looking for him to call for a global communist revolution, they ain't going to be in there. That's not what China does, right? They ain't Trotskyites in China, right? They're not trying to foment a global permanent revolution and bloodshed. That's not what China's doing. They ain't Trotskyites. What China is doing is they're trying to build up China and build a stable, prosperous socialist society. And they are trying to trade with countries on a basis of win-win cooperation and have a new global order in which there is peace, right, through international trade and cooperation, where countries are trading with each other. It's not predatory global trade. They're trading with each other in a fair way, and poverty is being eradicated, and the world is becoming more connected. And so that comes across China's worldview. what socialism is now. 21st century socialism, the Chinese understanding of 21st century socialism comes across in those writings. And it's very similar, I would argue, than what you find in, Maduro and Hugo Chavez writings. Maybe a different emphasis, but it's ultimately the same. It's similar to what you hear from Iranian leaders. Even though Iran rejects Marxism, it's an Islamic country, they're not from the Marxist tradition at all. If you look at what they advocate around the world, how they describe their system, again, matter of emphasis, there is an emerging alternative to Western capitalism in the world. The global axis of resistance is emerging, and China is a big part of it. So how do we have a strong code of discipline without tearing people down? Well, there's a difference between holding people accountable and tearing them down, right? I think that there's a difference, right? People need to be willing to follow rules. And as revolutionary organizations emerge, they are going to have to become more and more disciplined over time. Right now, at this point, there's nothing that really fits the criteria of being a broad revolutionary movement. There's certainly nothing, there's nothing military going on or anything like that. But yes, as revolutionary organizations develop, holding people accountable, requiring people to follow regulations, having organizational mandates that all members are required to carry out, etc. These things develop over time, absolutely. But again, people tend to get stronger through that kind of discipline, right? It's about finding, people's skills, forcing people to do things that they weren't really confident enough to believe they were capable of doing, right? Helping people to understand what they're capable of, to realize their own strength, ordering people to kind of overcome their own fears, overcome their own anxieties, take big risks. I mean, this is important stuff. All right. What was William Z. Foster's critique of Browder? Well, you can read, it's published, you can read his writings. Earl Browder was the leader of the Communist Party. After William Z. Foster had a massive heart attack in 1932, Earl Browder became the leader of the Communist Party. During World War II, Earl Browder dumped Marxism-Leninism. He dissolved the Communist Party. He changed it to being the Communist Political Association rather than the party. And he dropped Leninism. They were the Communist Political Association. They believed in Marxism, Jeffersonianism, not Leninism. They supported U.S. imperialism in Latin America. They argued that the USA was a democratic power and that the various, anti-imperialist, kind of nationalistic regimes were fascist. Earl Browder dropped the support for black nationalism. And after World War II, Earl Browder would not change these positions. When it was clear that the Cold War was starting and the Communist Party needed to be in an anti-imperialist mode, Earl Browder refused to alter these positions. So Earl Browder ultimately, he took the Popular Front, which was a correct position. You needed to have an anti-fascist alliance. He took the Popular Front and anti-fascist, alliances during World War II, and he took what was a tactic, right? Because it was necessary to do that as a tactic, and he made it into a law, right? He took a tactic and he made it into a law. And that's a really common problem, right? Sometimes communists have to fight with social democrats. Sometimes communists have to unite with social democrats. Sometimes communists run for office. Sometimes communists boycott elections, right? Tactics change. Sometimes communists endorse Republicans like Abraham Lincoln. Sometimes communists endorse Democrats like Roosevelt. Sometimes communists run their own candidates like the communists do. So, Gus Hall or William Z. Foster. Sometimes communists endorse progressive candidates like Henry Wallace. The tactics constantly change, right? Concrete and abstract labor. And the tactics constantly change. Constantly the tactics change. So, because of that, it's a mistake when the tactics were ready to change after World War II. They needed to be in an anti-imperialist mode. They needed to oppose the Democratic Party. Earl Browder didn't want to do that. And he came out with this new ideology that basically said American imperialism is always progressive. That there's no need for a communist party. There's no need for strikes. He wanted to continue the war, the wartime no strike pledge after after the war was over. He basically dumped class struggle, and that was Earl Browder. The Communist Party got rid of him because after World War II, they needed to be an anti-imperialist force. And so they had a convention, the Emergency Convention in 1945, expelled Earl Browder, and refounded the Communist Party. And that's what they went to prison for, because they refounded the Communist Party. That was the charge. They conspired to form a group that would teach an ideology that might lead one to the conclusion you should overthrow the government. That was what the conviction of the Communist Party leaders was in 1948. That's what they were charged with. Not teaching the violent overthrow, not even teaching an ideology that would teach the violent overthrow, but conspiring to teach an ideology that might lead people to the conclusion that one should have I mean, that's ridiculous, but that's what they were charged with for the convention where they kicked out Earl Browder. That was basically what the communist leaders all went to prison for. It's pretty wild, yeah. But the anti-Browder campaign is worth studying. You should read the anti-Browder stuff. Elizabeth Gurley Flynn wrote articles criticizing Earl Browder. A very important African-American revolutionary, Claudia Jones, she wrote a criticism of Earl Browder on the black national question. So yeah, it's very important. Growth in socialism. Do we already have enough? Well, we do already produce enough food to feed everyone, but we're not feeding them, right? Because of the way capitalism works, right? That's true, right? And that we could easily, with socialist central planning, create a society where people had enough. But that would just be the beginning. Socialism is about unleashing the innovation and creativity within the human spirit. It's about getting rid of the artificial restraints on human innovation and creativity that are imposed by capitalism, right? Capitalism is a system where abundance creates poverty. And I've talked about this many times, right? The coal miner's riddle. The father, I've told the coal miner's riddle many times, right? That, the father, his son says to him, "Father, why is it so cold?" He says, "Because we can't afford any coal." Why can't we afford any coal? I lost my job at the coal mine. I got laid off. Why did you get laid off at your job at the coal mine? Because there's too much coal. That's capitalism, right? That abundance creates poverty. Right now, we've had the biggest technological leap in the history of capitalism. The artificial intelligence, 3D printers. I mean, we can do anything with computers now. And if we had a rational society, that would be a good thing, right? It'd be great, right? We can do anything now. But instead, what do we have? Mass poverty and immigration and mass migration crisis and people starving. Why? Because under capitalism, you only work so long as you sell your labor to a capitalist. And the more technology advances, the fewer workers the capitalist needs. And so abundance and technological advancement creates poverty. Socialism gets rid of that by having a rationally, centrally planned economy. So it unleashes human growth. Angola is a socialist country. They had a revolution. There was the MPLA. They were fighting for their independence against the Portuguese colonialists. And in 1975, they won their independence. The MPLA set up a Marxist government. And almost immediately, and even before that, the CIA and other forces were funding this group called UNITA, which was they called themselves Maoists at first, the Union for the Total Liberation of Angola or whatever. Called themselves Maoists. They were not Maoists. They were not communists. They were just terrorists and thugs and cannibals, literal cannibals. And UNITA, was this terrorist group that was getting funded by the United States. And after Angola achieved independence in 1975, there was 22 years of civil war where the terrorists from UNITA were, bombing schools and terrorizing people. And Cuba sent its military to stand with the people of Angola to fight against UNITA. And in 2002, when the civil war finally ended, at that point, Angola exploded with economic growth. They finally had peace. There wasn't, a civil war going on, and there was a huge explosion of growth. And millions were raised up from poverty. It's still a deeply poor country, but before the oil price drop of 2014, from 2002 until 2014, Angola had one of the highest growth rates in the world. And they built schools, and they built hospitals, and they did some really, really amazing stuff. it was with the socialist government. It's still a deeply poor country, but it's aligned with China. Now right now there is a bit of a two-line struggle going on inside the MPLA. The MPLA party has dropped Marxism-Leninism as its ideology, considers itself to be social democratic, but that doesn't change the economic foundations. I mean, the country is still centered around state-controlled industries and such, and you still have a revolutionary party in charge of it. So despite the fact that ideologically there's been a little bit of a, watering things down, it still has the economic foundations of socialism. It's a very poor country, and there's divisions in the country. One section of the MPLA wants to get closer to Russia and China and adopt more of a socialist economy. Another section of the MPLA wants to move in a more free market direction and get closer to the United States. And so there's a division in the MPLA. The new president is much more in line with the pro-U.S. position, but there is still a huge layer of the party in Angola that is anti-imperialist and Marxist and wants to sign up with the Belt and Road Initiative. And that's why they're going after Isabel dos Santos. Isabel dos Santos, the richest woman in Africa. That's why they've targeted her, is because she's an anti-imperialist. She's closer to Russia and China. She wanted to force American oil companies that did business in Angola to work in the interest of the population. And the Wall Street Journal celebrated when she was ousted. So there are divisions in Angola. There are divisions in the MPLA, and we'll see how it works itself out. But right now, despite the fact that the more pro-U.S., the more neoliberal faction is in power, I would argue that Angola is still, the economic foundations are still socialist. So we'll see how things develop. All righty. All right, and let me add, it's a deeply poor country. It is one of the poorest countries in the world, but yet the moment of hope was from 2002 to 2014 when they had this explosion of socialist central planning creating growth with the state-run oil company, which is this explosion. And we shall see how things develop. But at the end of the day, when your country is deeply, deeply poor, Zimbabwe, Angola, having socialism in a deeply poor country, you need foreign investment. You can't have a totally state-run economy, and so you see how things develop, right? They're the revolutionaries of Angola, the revolutionaries of Zimbabwe, they're doing the best they can, right? So you have to understand the circumstances. They can't turn into China overnight, right? It's not that simple. If the U.S. is the imperial core, would the anti-imperial core include Russia and China? Yeah, of course. All right, Russia and China. Anti-imperialist. All right. How do we stop hate toward Asian Americans? Why does the media blame it on black people? Well, that thug who shot up the spa or whatever, he wasn't black. He was a white guy, right? Wasn't he? Wasn't that the guy who shot up the massage parlor? Wasn't he white? I thought he was white, right? That guy killed 8 Asian Americans, I believe. So he was white. And yeah, some of the videos that are coming out of hate crimes on the subways, it's people of color, but yeah, it's clearly not. Look, the people spewing hate for China on the TV and on the radio, it's mostly white Trump supporters, right? That's the Trump supporters, Tim Pool and all them. They're the ones, playing up the anti-China hysterics. Look, how do we stop anti-Asian hate crimes? The main thing to do is get people to stop. We have to push back against this lie that somehow COVID-19 is China's fault. It's not China's fault, right? The disease, the disease has nothing to do with race, and the Chinese government is not responsible for the disease. The Chinese government got it before everybody else and handled it way better despite that. They didn't know what it was. It started over there. It was the first place it was detected, and they handled it way better. So if anything, we should be learning from them, right? And if you look at, China, Vietnam, these countries have opened up and they're zooming ahead. So the idea there needs to be a public relations effort to get out of people's minds that somehow COVID is China's fault. Somehow COVID is linked to China, the China virus. Get this shit out of people's minds. Get it out of people's minds. All right. Hey, boss, good live. My question is, what's the main difference between a mixed economy and socialism? All right. Mixed economy and socialism. All righty. Okay. What can we learn from the French Commune and the German Revolution and their failures? Well, as far as the Paris Commune of 1871, that was considered to be the first dictatorship of the proletariat, the first example of workers taking power. And it was not led by Marxists. It was led by followers of Louis Auguste Blanqui. And Marxists were part of it, but it was generally dominated by Blanquists. And it was a very short, I think it was 2 months? I mean, it was a very short-lived government in Paris. And, it was a brief example of workers taking power. And they didn't go ahead and nationalize things like the banks. They were kind of frozen. They didn't quite know what they were doing. It basically emerged what had happened was, the French government of Louis Bonaparte was at war with Prussia. And the Prussians were winning. And so the capitalist government surrendered. And so then the workers of Paris, who wanted to keep the ideals of the French Revolution alive, refused to surrender. So the capitalists surrendered, and the workers of Paris didn't surrender. And they fought to defend their city from the Prussians. They created a socialist government, and they burned the guillotine. They had, different programs, to aid people. They did a lot of great stuff. For only being in power 2 months, they did some really great stuff, but they weren't ready to move ahead. They were kind of frozen. They didn't know what they were doing. They did have some very beginning of what might sound like a Soviet or a workers' council. They had some of that, but they needed to move ahead. Marx, in his Civil War in France, he gave a presentation, a very long speech called Civil War in France, where he went over the achievements of the communards and the failures. And there's a lot you can read about it. As far as the German Revolution of 1848, it was a failed revolution, but it was ultimately, it was an attempt to create a modern nation state. It was the Germans fighting to create a modern nation state. And among the Germans fighting to create a modern nation state, you had many different factions. The communists were just one faction in a very big coalition. And it ultimately was defeated, right? Feudalism triumphed. Germany didn't become a nation state for another 2 decades at least. So that's a little bit of a different situation. But there you go. Yeah, 1848 was the spring of nations. All over Europe, you had uprisings, revolts by people demanding democratic republics, right? It was all over Europe, people that lived under feudal principalities and monarchs and such. They rose up demanding a modern nation state. And it's interesting because, right, there's one song, the national anthem of Germany, that I think in Germany itself, it's actually illegal to sing, right? They've changed the words, but originally the anthem of Germany, Deutschland, Deutschland, über alles, Deutschland, über all das Welt. I don't think you can sing that in Germany anymore, but that was the national anthem of Germany until World War II, right? Germany, Germany, above all else, Germany over all the world. We hear that now. It's a Nazi pro-imperialist anthem, right? It's like Germany over all the world. It's an imperialist Nazi anthem. But at the time in 1848, when Germany was not a unified country, it was a bunch of feudal lords and principalities, and the German peasants largely. It was the peasantry. They wanted to unify Germany into a modern country that was like a democratic republic with voting and stuff like that. So they marched into battle to fight the feudal lords for their rights, and they marched into battle singing Deutschland, and it was progressive back then, right? And that shows how these things are confusing. Sorry, I meant 1918, 1919. All right, I'll put you back on the list. 1918, 1919. All right. But yeah, it was a progressive anthem at that time, but it became Deutschland über all Das Welt, over all the world, that's imperialism. It became an anthem of German imperialism. And after World War I, when Germany was stripped of its colonies, the Nazis used that song, to call for, that's what the Nazis wanted to do. They wanted to restore German imperialism, right? So it's now illegal to sing that first verse in Germany. But it started out as a progressive song, and that's dialectics. The nature of things can change over time. All right. And I mean, communism comes out of the German Revolution of 1848. And that anthem that I just sang there, that was the anthem of the 1848 revolution. You can bet that Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels and all of their buddies, they were marching into battle singing the same, Deutschland, Deutschland, über. They were singing that because that was the anthem of the German Revolution of 1848. And it was progressive back then. And then later it became reactionary. That's how history works, right? A does not equal A. Why does the U.S. ignore capitalist failure in Africa? Does the U.S. ignore capitalist failure in Africa? All righty. All right. Trotskyism. David Fox says Trotskyism is petty bourgeois ideology. It is. Trotskyism is the ideology of the revolutionary intelligentsia. In Karl Marx's pamphlet, The 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, where Karl Marx talks about, this petty bourgeois regime, this Bonapartist regime, led by Louis Bonaparte, the Bonapartist regime, he describes a section of French society from which Louis Bonaparte draws his strength, the Bohemians, right? And I don't have it in front of me. I wish I had it in front of me. But you should read this passage where he describes the kind of people, this movement of urban intellectuals and folks that backed the left-wing dictatorship of Louis Bonaparte, not a communist. And he's describing the revolutionary intelligentsia. He's describing a group of people who love chaos and love instability, and kind of see average people as the enemy. And that middle class intelligentsia that favors chaos and destruction, is isolated from the broad masses of people. That's where you find Trotskyism, right? Trotskyism, the revolution, the permanent revolution. It is a middle class deviation, right? And the story of Marxism is that gradually, Lenin was able to get the Bolsheviks out of the, revolutionary intelligentsia into the masses, and Stalin did it even more than Lenin did, and Mao did it even more than Lenin and Stalin did, and Marxism has gradually become more and more working class. Meanwhile, the revolutionary intelligentsia, the middle-class intellectuals, have become more and more pro-imperialist and more hostile to the masses of people and less progressive. I've written a lot about that. The thesis of City Builders and Vandals is about this understanding that the revolutionary intelligentsia, the hippies, the bohemian current, la bohème, what they called in France, that is not progressive. That is destructive. Fascism comes out of that current, Mussolini and George Sorel and all of that, that the revolutionary intelligentsia, the counterculture, the urban petty bourgeois, right? That element will not make a revolution, right? The broad masses of people make a revolution because they want a better life, not, the drive for chaos among urban intellectuals does not make a revolution. All right. Sakai. I've addressed this many times, but I will say what I always say when people talk about settlers, which is that settlers is not a revolutionary viewpoint. It argues that average Americans in the United States are all exploiters and that revolution is not possible because of that, because average Americans benefit from imperialism too much. That's the argument. The problem with that is that right now, living standards in the United States are going down drastically, and that there is a huge potential for solidarity, and that Jay Sakai, his writings are just basically a way to say, oh, there's no point, we don't want to do anything. And right now, there's more solidarity than ever, there's more class consciousness than ever, and it's not helpful. and it's not helpful. I don't think that average Americans who are losing their homes and losing their jobs right now and have relatives that are, in prison or suffering from opioid addiction and live in neighborhoods where the roads are falling apart and drink water that's not properly purified. I don't think those folks deserve that because they're a bunch of, Euro settlers. And no, I don't think we want, that's just not a working class perspective. The labor aristocracy phenomenon is a genuine thing, and that's been a factor, but it's like it's coming apart. The aristocracy of labor, right, that division, that stratification of the working class in the imperialist homelands is being undone right now. They're annihilating the aristocracy of labor. So now is not the time to be going around announcing that, there's no hope, all the workers in the United States are a bunch of labor aristocrats. Now is more than ever the time to get to people with real socialism. All right. Concrete and abstract labor. That's one of those Marxist concepts. It's escaping me at the moment, but I think what that refers to is Karl Marx pointed out the capitalist is not purchasing the labor of the worker. He's purchasing the worker's labor power. And that's an important distinction to make. It's the power of the labor, right? There are many instances where a capitalist boss will hire somebody and not utilize their labor, right? They may, people talk about plumbers, right? And pipe fitters, there may be a guy who works in a factory, right? I've known people who did this job before. They were welders, right? And they work in the factory 90% of the day. They don't do anything. But then the machine breaks. And so for 5 minutes, they're skilled enough. They get their, propane thing and they go over there and they do it, right? Now, if the capitalist is only buying the labor of that welder in the factory, who only works when the machine breaks down, then he would only be hiring him for 5 minutes a day. But that welder is there, 8 hours a day, sitting there in case the machine breaks and he has to go, weld it. So the capitalist is really buying the labor power of the welder. He's not buying the labor of the welder. And that's very common, that a lot of times capitalist bosses will employ a worker, right? And basically have them on standby and pay for the ability to have them on standby. They're not literally paying for the labor. They're paying for the labor power, for having that labor power available to them. That's an important point, and Marx makes that in Wages, Prices, and Profits. I believe he makes that point. All right. Next question. Russia and China are anti-imperialist. I would say so. They're not screaming global revolution. They're not Trotskyites, but they are a bulwark of resistance to the domination of the world by Western capitalism. They trade with countries on the basis of win-win. They're not trying to drive the world into poverty so they can stay on top. They're trying to build themselves up and build up the countries they're trading with, the Eurasian Economic Union, the Belt and Road Initiative. I would see them as anti-imperialist. All right. How is the mixed economy different than socialism? Well, mixed economy is a vague thing, right? A mixed economy, right? So what is a mixed economy? Right? Every capitalist economy has some state sector, right? The U.S. Constitution mandates that we have a post office. Does that make it a mixed economy? No. It just means that we have a post office. And in order to maintain capitalism, you have to have a post office that doesn't work for one capitalist or favor one capitalist over the others. It has to be an independent force. And so that's why the U.S. Constitution has, a post office in it, right? A lot of capitalist countries, will have things like public libraries. They'll have roads, that are paved by the government, So, in some countries like Norway and Sweden, public ownership is more expanded, right? There'll be things like, there'll be maybe some government-owned natural resources, right? I think there's some government proceeds are received from some natural resources in Norway and Sweden and countries like that. Those countries are still capitalist. The public ownership that goes on is simply to facilitate the capitalist market, right? In Britain, for a long time, the mines were nationalized and the railroads were nationalized. That's not socialism. That's just capitalism with some collective capitalist ownership. Right? So is that a mixed economy? Every capitalist economy is mixed to some degree or other. Socialism is an economy where profits are not in command, right? You can have a state sector in capitalism. Look, Saudi Arabia is almost all government ownership. But is Saudi Arabia socialist? No, it's not, because all the state sector does is facilitate the making of profits by the royal family. It's a for-profit capitalist economy with the government in there making a monopoly for the Saudi royal family, basically. What about, Britain after World War II, they nationalized a lot of things, mines, railways, but was that because Britain became socialist? No, it's because they wanted to rebuild their industries with taxpayer money. They wanted to facilitate the capitalist market of Britain, growing, and then they eventually privatized it all. It was never socialist, right? That state involvement and socialism are not the same thing. The difference between capitalism and socialism is, why is production carried out? In a capitalist economy, the means of production function to make profits for those who own them. In socialism, the means of production are forced to work in the interests of society. They might be private, they might be public, but they're controlled by society. You have a government, a state, that forces the means of production to work in the interests of society overall. That's the difference. All right. In Germany, they meant 1918 and 1919. Well, look, in 1918 and 1919, the main issue was that in Germany, World War I ended. And the workers rose up and overthrew the Kaiser, and you had workers' councils all over Britain, all over Germany, that were taking power. And, the Social Democratic Party, the main party in Germany, the main left-wing party, did not want to create a socialist society. They wrote a capitalist constitution and argued that after free elections, maybe Germany could move towards socialism if that's what people voted for. And Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, that were part of their group, was called Spartacus Bund. They revolted and demanded the creation of a socialist constitution, and they were ruthlessly killed. Now, the issue is that in 1918 and 1919, the German Social Democratic Party had become so big, it became such a big party, that instead of being a revolutionary party, it became part of what held German imperialism together, right? They created a national health care service. That's true. The German Kaiser created a national health care service, and there were a lot of labor unions, and that the German Social Democratic Party became less and less revolutionary and became more and more part. It built this machine that functioned under capitalism, rather than building a revolutionary organization to overthrow capitalism. So when World War I came, the German Social Democratic Party supported World War I, and sent workers off to their deaths. And that was a result of the fact that gradually, over the course of decades and decades, the Marxist movement of Germany stopped being a revolutionary movement to overthrow German imperialism and became more or less a method that the German imperialists used to make their imperialist society more stable. And that's what happened, right? And that's the danger with any revolutionary movement, right? And that part of that was the labor aristocracy, that well-paid, quote-unquote, skilled workers in Germany who did not have an interest in revolution became very, very dominant in the socialist movement, in the Socialist Party, while unemployed workers and poor people weren't, right? So the more privileged workers, who are less revolutionary, became the dominant voice in the Social Democratic Party. The more revolutionary and low-paid workers were not. And it was all a factor. Part of it, and so it developed, and the revolutionary crisis happened, and the Social Democratic Party, dominated by the labor aristocracy, dominated by people who had built this huge machine under capitalism, they were too scared to lose everything, basically. They had built up so much strength under the existing system, and thank you for the super chat, that when it came time, when it came to crunch time, when it was actually time to fight for the revolution, they didn't do it. And that's a problem that develops in socialist parties, right? Especially in the imperialist homeland, that they become kind of a mechanism for stabilizing capitalism rather than becoming a revolutionary organization. I argue that we have the exact opposite problem. The exact opposite problem. Nowadays, right, the problem that we have isn't that there's a huge socialist movement, a huge mass Marxist and socialist movement that is becoming a tool of imperialism. I argue the problem is that nobody knows anything about socialism, right? In Germany, there were millions of Marxists that were well organized into the Social Democratic Party, and the Social Democratic Party, as a result of being so big and being so much a part of the German society and the German government, became less revolutionary. Nowadays, nobody knows anything about communism, right? If AOC was president, okay, if AOC was president and there were like millions and millions of Americans that were in DSA, like half the US population were in DSA, then we might be in the same situation. That's not the situation we are in, okay? People in the USA are barely starting to finally get interested in Marxism, and so it's not like Germany in 1918, 1919. All righty. Why does the U.S. ignore the failures of capitalism in Africa? Good question, right? All over Africa, they've been having free market capitalism in so many of these countries, right? Nigeria, Tanzania. I mean, many of these countries have had free market systems for so long, and the people are still grinding into poverty, and no one ever blames that on capitalism. Haiti, free market country, no one ever blames that on capitalism, right? Dominican Republic, free market capitalism. Honduras, Guatemala, free market capitalism. All over the world, capitalism failed, but no one ever says that's capitalism. But oh my gosh, Venezuela's got a problem, and that proves socialism has never accomplished anything. And then you point out all the achievements of Russia and China, and they say, oh, that's not, none of that counts. None of our achievements and successes count. You point out that Bolivia had the highest rate of GDP growth of any country in South America. Oh, that doesn't count. None of it ever counts. It's infuriating. The way the conversation about capitalism and socialism in the United States is infuriating. No one talks about our achievements. None of our achievements count. They've always got some loophole. And then every problem that's happened has been purely because of socialism. Meanwhile, all the problems of capitalism all over the world, they just don't notice them. That's not really capitalism. I mean, it's ridiculous. Ridiculous. But folks, as I said at the beginning of this live, words can give you power. If you want to get through hard times, if you want to find the optimism in yourself, words can give you power. The way I always end these lives is with this point, with this quotation. So I'm going to end the live with this quotation. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. What we need is a government of action to fight for working families. Have a good night.